Hi everyone, I'm Luca Schiatti. I'm part of the Accenture labs in Sophia Antipolis in the south of France. The Accenture labs are the research and the development and research organization for Accenture. In the next few minutes, I'm going to introduce a bit the work we did in the last years around supply chain, trade finance, and traceability. But before that, and also see some real live demo to give you an idea of tangible and concrete blockchain in action. Before that, just an introduction to our labs. So Accenture is really a big organization, more than 400,000 employees worldwide. The labs is a small network of 7 labs around the world, with the main one in Silicon Valley. And we have around 200 research, so it's a relatively small group in Accenture. And we are working on new technology. Our job is really to see what's new, what are the new technology out there, from the open source, from university, and from startup, and see how this can match our client needs. We started on blockchain now 4 years ago. At the time was more to investigate the impact of Bitcoin for financial services, and now our labs based in the south of France, between Nice and Cannes, is full-time working on blockchain since then. So everyone, if you are an Accenture client, you are welcome to visit there. We have a showroom, we do a workshop with our clients, and we work on blockchain. Again, what is our focus in the labs in this day? There are two main focus, and this is in line on what we just heard now: digital identity and blockchain interoperability. These two topics are the real, we think, at least in the labs, the real focus that everyone should have around blockchain. Digital identity is about to have a unique global blockchain identity for people, companies, and things and objects. Once you achieve that, you will may need a blockchain. You can just have a distributed identity system, and you can identify everyone that you interact with. Either you put this information on a distributed ledger, or you keep it in your personal data storage, and you share only when you need to share it. But what we are seeing in the last years, working a lot with a lot of different clients, a lot of use cases, that 100 out of 100 use cases, 90% you don't need blockchain, 10% you need blockchain, and a lot of the 10% you probably solve the problem with distributed digital identity. And the other topic that we are working on is blockchain interoperability. Again, as we discussed before, if everyone starts his own blockchain or his ecosystem, we're going to end up again with silos that need to interact with them. So even also blockchain interoperability is an important topic that I think a lot of companies will start to work now on. And in Accenture, we are working this with our partners, technology partners, and also with university. On top of that, in the labs, we do a lot of other activities. We experiment with different technology, etc. And as we're focusing on enterprise blockchain, our current focus on platform is on Corda, Digital Asset, Fabric, and Ethereum Enterprise. As Accenture, we are technology agnostic. We don't prefer one platform to the others, but we really work with our clients and understand what is the best fit for their problem. And we are doing different work on the different platform. For example, I worked last year in Singapore for the Monetary Authority project, where we did the same proof of concept over the 3 different platforms. So if you have any question in the break, we can just ask me what our experience on the different platforms. And finally, we collaborate with university. I added here the University of Houston, so I hope we can start soon to collaborate. But also because, as mentioned, R&D is really a key part for the blockchain development. So going back a bit on what we did in this year, as I mentioned, we are working on 360 degree. I'm on blockchain. I'm a mainly a technical person, not a business person, and I work with cross-industry. So I had experience with really different industry in these years. On the supply chain side, what we noticed is that in the end, all the different use cases that we have, it ends up in actually one unique use cases. The use case for supply chain, for trade finance, and for a lot of what we saw today is just the idea that today we have every actor that is owning his own data or is interact with a third-party services. With the blockchain, you can either remove these third-party services that provide the connection between all the different parties, or you can use, and you can use the blockchain. So the idea of the blockchain for supply chain and for a lot of other use cases is the fact that we have a unique single source of trust where everyone is interacting and sharing transaction data, according visibility that you need to have on the data, etc. But all the different use cases you can solve, you can have reconduct to these use cases. Unique ledger distributed between the different actors without intermediaries. Probably, if your use case doesn't fit in this solution, you probably don't need the blockchain, because except for other cases like cryptocurrency, etc., a lot of them end up in this area. So once we are all agree with that, so again, interacting with competitors, partners on a single ledger, what are the benefit that we can have on the blockchain? And of course, some of this benefit, we can have it also with just digitalization without the blockchain. So the blockchain is really when you don't want to trust someone in the middle and when you want to interact with your partners and competitors. So first, you have a new visibility into supply chain. We have a distributed system. We don't control one single system where we ask everyone to put data in our system, but we have a distributed system where I have my data, I share what I need with who I want to share, and I can have in real time information about the supply chain and act and get alert information in real time. The other thing is that we have new process efficiency. So we can imagine that now we can digitalize things that is more difficult without a blockchain. I'm thinking for trade finance, the bill of lading, and a lot of things that we have digital solution, but it's difficult to have everyone on the same solution or trust someone to store the data in behalf of the companies. We have new customer engagement options. This is more on the end user side. And I'm thinking in this case about the food traceability, so we can give more information trusted to the final users, and then we can also start to think, and this is when we talk about innovation, is start to think about new collaboration model. There is the tendency that we take a process as it is, we just take it and we replicate it on the blockchain. Is not necessarily the way to go. Sometimes with the blockchain, we can also rethink existing process and see how we can optimize them with this new technology. And the last 2 points I think is really important for the supply chain industry is about data ownership, and this is also close to the digital identity. But the data ownership is that it means that now we don't. A lot of times there is the idea that with the blockchain we need to give away our data because we need to share with all the ecosystem, etc. It's not necessarily true. It depends how you want to design your blockchain and your solution. Actually, it's a bit the opposite. You have your own data. You can share some of them with the partners or with the point-to-point, with the people you need to share the data, and you are the owner of this data. And then you can also think about to solve them if you need, etc. But the main point on blockchain is that you're moving from a centralized service to owned by someone else, a third party, to your IT infrastructure that has a node and has a transaction. So you are getting your data with you. And finally, and this is an important topic, and from this I think there is a lot of research still to do, is about, for supply chain specifically, is about alignment between physical and digital. And this is also one of the big topics, I think, related to supply chain. So how we make sure that the information that we have in the digital world, in the blockchain, but even in the decentralized world, so it's not really a blockchain problem, how it match with the physical object that we have in our hands. And we'll see some example on this. So once we have all these benefits, what we saw in the supply chain use case, I mean, is that what we see in these days is that mainly it applies for track and trace, contracts between different companies, suppliers, carriers, manufacturers, etc. And then also for trade finance, for all the finance around the supply chain. So if we take an example of supply chain, Here is a bit the areas where we see the blockchain having relevance. So end-to-end traceability, materials and service procurement, contracting, goods track and trace, international trade documentation, visibility of the goods, and invoicing, as we saw yesterday. So we can start to think about using the blockchain in each of these steps. But again, coming back to what I said before, is all about creating an ecosystem. Once we have all the actors we are working with on this ecosystem, when we have trusted identity we can interact with, we can cover these use cases, and we can also think about much more use cases. But the main point is about to build this ecosystem. Because if I started by myself or with the 2-3 companies, so we are a really small ecosystem, starting to do some of this, the blockchain could make sense, but you lose a lot relevance and efficiency, because then I will have to do the same process with other companies in another system, in another digital system that maybe is centralized, and things start to get complicated. So the main point is really to be able to create the cooperation, to create ecosystem, and to have everyone on board on the same blockchain. Now, this is a bit the overview on how we see blockchain for supply chain. I will share a bit some experience we had with our client later. Before that, as I mentioned, I would like to show you some a little live demo that actually introduced the concept of traceability, trackability, and to see a blockchain live. In this case, what we built is a simple proof of concept where we're actually following the raw materials, the coffee beans, from the production to the processor, to the coffee house. And here is simple as having all these different actors: the cooperative that is producing the coffee, the quality grader, the one that certifies the quality of the coffee, the exporter, the importer, the processor, etc., all on the same blockchain. And every one of them, starting from the order from the coffee house to the cooperative, start to track each transaction, the current status of this order. So I switch to the demo, if everything works fine. So here we have a map of the world. You don't see it. Okay, so we have a map of the world. Here we have all the different actors. One first important point. Here we see 5 actors. If they do some business together, they will see the transaction between them. But in the real world, we should imagine that we have different importer, different exporter. We need to imagine a bigger ecosystem, because again, I will never be tired to repeat every time. Smaller is the ecosystem, less the blockchain makes sense. Because if we have only 5 actors that need to share the data between them, and all of them has visibility on this data, we can, at that point, trust some centralized service without having to invest and work on and do the effort to build actually a blockchain. But let's imagine a bigger ecosystem. Let's imagine a lot of cooperatives, a lot of exporters, everyone identified, enrolled in the blockchain that will interact between them. So here we see these 5 actors: South America, the cooperative. We see the importer in Europe, and each of them will have a role. Now, in terms of user experience for the coffee house and for the actors that are interacting with this blockchain, the UI it's simply something that they are used to use. So there is a lot of work. Of course, the blockchain is just covering really a little piece of the infrastructure that need to be built on top of the blockchain, with the integration with existing system, etc. So the blockchain will just cover the last piece of the transaction level, but on top of that, you will need to integrate to your system, to build UIs, etc. So in this case, we are interacting with the blockchain from the coffee house. The idea is that the coffee house will have his node with his private key in his IT system, or maybe having this in a cloud service, and from there he can click on new order. He can see the type of coffee available. He can, for example, decide that he wants to order 1,000 of these and 1,000 of these. these two types, and then can validate an order. When I click on validate, is that the point that the coffee house that has a node on the blockchain is creating a transaction, is signing the transaction, is sending the transaction to the network, and the transaction get validated. And when the transaction is validated, it has the new information on on its view. Here we can see the ID. The ID is the actually smart contract ID that define a new contract created on the blockchain related to his order with all the information that related to the order he did. And on the other side, we can see the cooperative that, of course, recorded already some information on the blockchain about all the coffee that he has, with the quality, etc., with the quantity, and you can see the orders. And in this case, you can see that the orders, the time that has been created, the amount, etc. And some part of this is automated on the blockchain via smart contract. But the main point, again, is having a transaction that is shared between the two without having a centralized system that sees this information and can build logic on top of this information. Now, I'm going to do the step-by-step simulating step. Of course, we can start from the cooperative that is creating the 2 units. Then I click on the North American quality to simulate the approval and from the exporter, etc. So every time I click on one of these actors, I'm creating a transaction that again is signed by the different actors in the chain. And if I go back on the UI of the of the coffee house, you can see step by step, of course, the status of this order with, again, a unique ID that reference the initial raw materials that was input by the cooperative. And I can continue like this. I can then click on the importer, and then finally on the coffee house that received all the information. I will update again, and again, as we see, we can have step by step all the different position of the coffee that I order from the beginning. Some important point here. So of course this view is the same for the cooperative and for all the importer and exporter that participated to the trade. One important thing: blockchain for traceability doesn't guarantee that what I'm writing there is actually what I'm really moving and having on my ships and receiving at the coffee house. And this is an important point. When we see blockchain can reduce the counterfeit of the products, it's true, but it just reduced the risk. It's increased visibility. I give you an example. If I order 2,000 kilograms and the exporter, when he received the materials, he has only 1,000. It will not sign a transaction or will run a transaction on the blockchain to say here there is a mismatch between what is being declared by the cooperative and what as an exporter, I'm receiving. So we can increase the visibility on real time on what's happened in step by step. But if the cooperative said that it's gonna sell coffee A, but it's taking coffee B, blockchain will not solve this problem. To solve this problem, of course, you will need to integrate other technologies on top of the blockchain. So blockchain is really, it responsibilizes the different actors because now they are signing transaction information with their private key. And this is really important because they are not asking someone else to store an information. They are signing an information with their own private key. So they will never be able to say, I didn't set that or I didn't sign that transaction, while they could do that today with a centralized system. But on top of that, you will need to, when it's possible, because, for example, the case of raw material is one of the most difficult ones to make sure that the physical and digital is actually the same, you can use other technology to guarantee that. Some more futuristic, like molecular scanning, when we can do the scanning of an object and make sure this is the same we have recorded on the blockchain, or some AI, etc. It works well, for example, for diamonds. Diamond has an ID on the laser. You can put an ID on the diamond, so it's much easier to have this ID matching the ID on the blockchain or on any digital system. So again, blockchain in this case just increase the visibility and responsibilize the different actors inside in the supply chain. On top of that, blockchain is also, in this case, managing orders and orders from the coffee house to the cooperative. So how the blockchain looks like, probably you already saw one, but if you never saw blockchain, it's just a list of blocks, nothing more. So it's just text that is shared between actors, signed. So all the different transactions are signed, verified by the validation system of the blockchain, and we make sure that this information that is now in my local database, in my local infrastructure, is actually what the cooperative, for example, signed in another moment. And that's why, again, digital identity is really important for blockchain, because I can receive a signed transaction, but if I don't have the guarantee that the one that signed the transaction is the one that claimed to be, all this information, this trust, these things that we have on the blockchain, it loses its value. So digital identity, the way the ecosystem are managed, the way we enroll the different actors, the way we distributed, the way we have the public key, and we enroll the different actors, is really a key point of the blockchain. And if I go back to digital identity, now, once we have everyone enrolled, identified on this blockchain with their private key, using their public key to sign transaction, we can choose to put the transaction on the blockchain, like in this case, to have make sure that no one can modify the information, etc. But we could also imagine that we don't want to put this information on the blockchain. I send the transaction, I send it directly to the cooperative, is sending directly to the coffee house, and they are sure to exchange this information in a trusted way without having to put this information on the blockchain. So case by case, we need to understand, and that's what we do with our client, is when we actually need to put information on the blockchain, well, we really need to have smart contract, when we really need to onboard this logic on a distributed system, or when we just need a unique way to make sure that the information that we receive are trusted and signed by the right person. And so this was the use case around supply chain and traceability. We have some others related to trade finance, for example. And also trade finance is a huge topic that we work on this also with a lot of with some different clients that are starting to build ecosystem. They're starting to interact with others. But the idea is not so different from what we just saw before. The idea is about digitalize, for example, the letter of credits, the bill of lading, and also these different actors. We built a demo, I will show quickly, that is about the letter of credit, but what we are actually doing when we are with the client is not, as I mentioned before, taking a process exactly as it is and put it on the blockchain. There is a work that we are doing with our industry expert on trade finance, etc., with the client to understand, is the system of bill of lading something that we need to reproduce exactly the same? Or there is some more smart way to have the same information and do it in a different way. The other big things main problem on trade finance is, again, okay, I can start the port, I don't know, some port can start to do that with some carriers, with some banks, and start to do this digitalized end-to-end on the blockchain. But again, if on the other side of the world, Hong Kong and Singapore are redoing exactly the same things in another blockchain, in another system, we are a bit recreating again the different silos that we are seeing today. So today there are systems to digitalize the bill of lading. Why there is a little adoption? Because it's so complex, it's so big, the ecosystem, that is, even if you have this separate blockchain, you will not solve the problem yet. So this is always, someone has to start, some way we need to start. interoperability at certain point could help this aspect, but there is a really long journey to really digitalize and put all this documentation, this process on a blockchain. And the main challenge, again, is to be able to build this ecosystem. Is to able to have everyone on the same infrastructure, on the same IT system, following all the same rules. And this is why, on this type of use cases, regulation play a really important role. From my experience, the most successful project that we did were not with the banks, were not with our client directly, but is when there was an involvement of central banks, regulation, actors that actually have a power to push everyone on the same standard. So, but how this will work? So I go back on our demo. I mean, it's going to be pretty similar. Just to give you an idea, that's what I said before. A lot of this use case in the end is about having a UI, doing some things, and send a transaction on the blockchain and share it with the different actors. So similar to what we saw before. Also in this case, for trade finance, we can imagine that we have an importer that is requesting a letter of credit to his bank. His bank, via the blockchain, he receives a new transaction. This new transaction, here I created 3 of them. I don't know why, but you can see the information. This JSON format, sorry, you don't see my screen. Okay, sorry. So I clicked here. I created a request for a letter of credit to the bank. The bank received this new letter of credit. We see some data related to the information related to the letter of credit. This can be easily integrated to existing system. So it's all about, again, integrating API on existing system. It can do some action that can be, of course, automatized. Here I have to click accept to make sure that the letter of credit is accepted by the bank. The bank of the exporter receives the same information. It can also do some action, accept it, etc. So again, it is the flow step by step with transaction on the blockchain, and via the smart contract we can automatize some of these things. Another misconception I think there is on the blockchain is on the power of smart contract. Of course, smart contract can help, can automatize some steps, but smart contract by themselves will not solve all the logic that you need to put in place for a process. Because every time you will need information from the outside world to be on the blockchain. The blockchain is often, different solutions are a closed system. It doesn't talk outside, but you can talk to the blockchain. So it's true that you can use a smart contract, but again, a lot of time the logic of the smart contract is a really little part and not the main one. Of course, depend on the use case. But for this type of use case, the logic of smart contract is not relevant as we think. The logic of smart contract is more important when we want to have automatic payments, contracting with automatic action if something happens, etc. But in this case, it's mainly about register a process step by step. And of course, I can simulate the shipment, and when there are the shipment, we can do, as I mentioned, automatic payment. So in this case, we can imagine to do an automatic payment when there is actually the shipment, and finally we take the right one, 22 of May. We can have the shipment information and the actual payment approved in the blockchain. So again, this is our proof of concept that we built in the beginning when we start to work on blockchain to show our client. But then, of course, the real world is always much more complex than a proof of concept. So these are the main two, traceability, trade finance are two of the main use cases we saw a lot with our client. Another one we are working quite a lot is about oil supply chain and the commodities trading. So there is a lot of companies that today are working on this topic There is consortium that already been built, that they were gonna move on that. But again, the idea is again about the tracking of the assets, define the terms, the agreements between the different actors, and then also maybe add the financial aspect on the blockchain. And again, all the things I mentioned before in the previous use cases are true also of this. The importance of the ecosystem, having everyone on the same page, etc., etc. So, and that's also one of the things that I had from my experience is that the most advanced use cases that today are almost in production are use cases where the ecosystem are really small. We can't tell the name of the client or the industry, but we work with some part of the insurance industry where the world is small. So the companies, to onboard everyone, it's much easier than other cases like trade finance, like supply chain and commodities trading, etc. And finally, the shipping that we mentioned, etc. So these are the main use cases. There is much more. Another use cases we work with some client was about KYC for all the different companies to have a unique identifier for all the company around the world where you have to work with, the bill of lading, as I mentioned, etc., etc. But to recap a bit, so today, as Accenture, but not only as Accenture, we're doing hundreds. I think Accenture, we did globally more than 200 proof of concept on blockchain. Every company is testing his own blockchain, doing their things. But the main challenge is there is a lot of different startups. So here we have a group of startups that are working on supply chain, etc. The main challenge is and it's not easy to do and will not happen soon, is to try to onboard to have a bigger ecosystem as possible. Potentially, like we're working for digital identity of the people, in the future, we can imagine that my digital identity is defined by the state, and then I use this one to interact with all the different blockchain. We could imagine something like this for the industry, but the path to go there is really long, and it will not happen anytime soon. So that's why there is need of this interoperability. So I don't know how much time I have, but a few minutes.
About 5 minutes left, including questions.
Perfect. So I will just recap a bit. So now let's forget a bit the supply chain and everything, but in general, as mentioned before, there is a huge hype on blockchain. We think that blockchain can solve everything, etc. I think, and it's good that we are hearing more and more. So if I think about 1 year ago, 2 years ago, people were less critical on blockchain. But today we hear a lot. So probably you don't need a blockchain. A lot of the use cases you can be done with a centralized service. We don't need to do blockchain because the effort to have a blockchain is too big to the benefit that you can get with the blockchain. The technology needs to solve real business problem. So, and this exercise that a lot of companies are doing today is really difficult one, and sometimes doesn't bring any results. Because sometimes, as I mentioned, you don't really need the blockchain. You can put all the people you have in your company to find a blockchain use case, but there is no one. So it's always trying to be business problem oriented, and also from my experience, the most successful project was the one that was starting from a real business problem. And another important thing, and this I saw a lot of companies doing this, is saying, I want to do the blockchain because I want to be the first one and have a main position on this blockchain. This is not the right mindset for the blockchain. Again, we are talking about ecosystem, collaborating with partners, competitors even. So again, you need to understand what is the benefit for the industry, and probably the good use case is the one that bring a benefit for the ecosystem. If you're building a blockchain because you want to make money out of that blockchain, probably, this is my opinion, will not gonna work because no one will join your blockchain to make advantage for you. So you need to understand really on a mindset of ecosystem. And again, just to recap, you need to understand that A blockchain is not like mobile app. I started years ago working on the mobile app. Everyone was doing his mobile app. We can do a mobile app to do this and this and this. Blockchain doesn't work exactly the same. Of course, you can have a lot of application on the blockchain, but if you need to build an ecosystem, convince the partner to be on a blockchain, start to create a transaction with them, to solve a problem that really little or not significant in terms of benefit, no one will do this big effort to solve a small problem. So when you need to think the blockchain to be relevant, you need to think big, to think about something that will require time, require effort from your company, from all the others company, to get together on a blockchain. So said that, there are some use cases where blockchain is really relevant, and is Accenture, since we are working on that, and is also our interest, is really to focus on these ones where we can see a futures for this use case. But also for that, use cases that make sense on blockchain, as mentioned, so I repeat myself a bit, but there is a problem of technology maturity. All the main platforms that are selling, they're still under development. I can say it from my experience. You can see all the news in CoinDesk that you want. You can read everything. But a lot of these startup and companies that are blockchain vendors are still under development. So there is a work to do that to reach a technology maturity. But this will come while you are building your ecosystem. Interoperability is going to be more important, because if we start for real doing blockchain, we will need to interoperate between blockchain. As I mentioned, digital identity and standardization. So a lot of this is about having a standard. As the web was a standard to put everyone being able to send email to each other, more or less the blockchain will need to pass this process. So I really, as Accenture, we are trying also to join all these standardization effort. Again, for digital identity, we joined the Digital Identity Foundation that for people is trying to define the standard of digital identity. Because digital identity is also a standardization is the problem to interoperability. It solves the problem of interoperability. And more on supply chain side, there is a lot of work, as I mentioned, to do to make sure the physical digital match together. So I think I finished, so thank you a lot. That's all.
We've actually exceeded our opportunity to ask questions. Maybe we can take one if you have a quick one. You have a quick one? Go ahead.
What is your vision of getting the digital identity to be referred back to from the blockchains? It's easy to see if you can get the to initiate, as you're suggesting, via the gateway from the digital identity to go into the blockchains, but how do you get the various blockchains to sit there and say, we'll refer back to the digital identity? And also, this is kind of important because you're assuming the state will create the critical mass for the digital identity. That's not that clear to me. But how are you going to, but once you get the digital identity, how are you going to get it from the blockchains back out?
So,
what's your vision for that?
yeah, so I don't know if I get the question, but the idea of digital identity is much related to the blockchain. So it's digital identity to have it on the blockchain. So when we talk about digital identity, I talk about the distributed system, where on the blockchain we have just our identity, so our public key that we use to sign the transaction. Once you have that, then you can either use it in blockchain, so the blocks, we sign the transaction and make sure we know we are sending the transaction and validate, or having systems, we call it hubs, where I have my data. We have a system where you can have access to my data according to what I want to give to you, and we do that via the identity that we define on the blockchain.
But the identity is not just a public key or even several public keys. There's a lot more information in an identity. So once you get that into the blockchain, how do you get it back out?
Yeah, identity is much more. But for example, we need to see how the identity is defined for blockchain. But of course, it's not the public. It's not only the public address. The public address is just the starting point to refer a system, data that are signed by trusted actors. We don't have really time to go in details, but the idea is that, for example, I'm Italian. The state will provide me an attestation sign that say that I'm Luca Schiatti, I'm living in this country, and this. Now I have this attestation that is signed by the Italian state. So in this way, we can build our identity by a lot of different attestation by a group of trusted actors that will provide this attestation.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Schiatti, thank you so much for your time.